Okay, so imagine you're at this like grand ball at the Tudor court, right?
Ah.
You've got like all these ladies in their silks and jewels and gentlemen with their fancy doublets, and like the music is just swirling around you.
It's such a vivid scene.
Right, it's like you can almost smell the roasted meat and the perfume.
Totally. And then you glance over and you see this woman like totally focused
Yeah.
on this tiny portrait she's painting.
Like a miniature.
Uh-huh. Capturing someone's likeness in such detail.
You know, we always think of those iconic male artists like Hans Holbein, the guy who like basically defined Tudor portraiture, right?
Right, but what if I told you there were women painting the Tudors too?
Whoa, for real?
Oh, yeah. And they were probably even more active than we think.
That's so cool.
Yeah, it's like a whole hidden layer of art history.
I love that.
Yeah.
So today we're going deep into the lives of two of these amazing female artists, Susanna Horenbout and Levina Teerlinc.
These women weren't just like dabblers, they were masters of miniature portraiture.
Total rock stars.
Yeah, like sought after by royalty. And living in this like super dramatic world of the Tudor court.
Okay, so spill the tea. What are the sources for today's deep dive?
We've got some awesome stuff. We're drawing from Professor Susanna Lipscomb's lecture, and then we've got some super insightful interviews with miniature experts Emma Rutherford and Alan Derbyshire.
So basically we're going full art history nerd today.
You bet.
I am so here for it. Let's start with Susanna Horenbout. So like, where does her story even begin?
Susanna's story really shows how important family was in the Renaissance, especially for artists.
Makes sense.
Right, like connections were everything. So her dad, Gerard Horenbout, he was a big deal in Flanders.
What was he known for?
Manuscript illumination. Like
Yeah.
super intricate, detailed work.
Oh, wow. So like those beautiful books with all the gold leaf and stuff?
Exactly. And her brother Lucas followed in his footsteps, became a painter too.
Whoa, talk about a talented family.
Right.
Like imagine growing up surrounded by all that creativity.
It's no wonder Susanna showed artistic promise from a young age.
I mean, it's practically in her DNA.
And there's this amazing story.
Okay, I'm ready.
So back in 1521, Susanna is like, what, 18 years old?
Super young.
She meets Albrecht Dürer,
Wait, the Albrecht or Dürer? Like the famous German artist?
the one and only. And he's so impressed with Susanna's work,
What?
he buys a piece from her.
Seriously?
Yeah.
That's not just a compliment. That's like major validation.
Right. Talk about a confidence boost.
Okay, but how did the Horenbouts even end up in England?
Well, there's this theory that King Henry II himself invited them over.
Wow. So like headhunted for their artistic skill.
Basically.
Yeah.
And they quickly get connected with some super powerful women at court.
Like who are we talking?
Margaret of Austria, Catherine of Aragon, names you definitely recognize.
The Tudor court was like a who's who of powerful women.
It totally was.
Okay, so here's where things get really juicy for us art history detectives.
Hit me with it.
Susanna might have been one of the first artists to create portrait miniatures in England.
Now that's a claim to fame.
I know, right? So there's this intriguing portrait of young Princess Mary, probably painted between 1521 and 1525. And some experts think it could be Susanna's work.
Wow, that would make it the earliest known English portrait miniature.
Right.
It's
Well-
definitely a possibility, but, you know, attributing these early miniatures can be tricky.
Like how so?
Well, a lot of them were probably made in the Horenbout workshop, right?
Yeah.
Where you'd have family members, apprentices, everyone working together on pieces.
So it's like trying to figure out who wrote which lines in a group project.
Perfect analogy.
Okay, so how do we even start to untangle who painted what?
Art historians basically become detectives.
Ooh, I love it.
We have to analyze the hand of the artist.
What does that even mean?
So we look at brushstrokes, how the colors are applied, and tiny stylistic choices.
Like what?
The shape of an eye, the curve of a finger, anything that distinguishes one artist from another.
It's like a code you have to crack.
Exactly.
Okay, so how do we crack this Susanna code? Is there like a key to unlock her artistic signature?
This is where Emma Rutherford's research is super important. She thinks she's found a miniature of Mary Tudor painted in the late 1540s.
Wow.
And this could be the missing piece to understanding Susanna's unique style.
So like a hidden masterpiece revealing Susanna's artistic fingerprint.
It's totally possible.
This is getting good.
Yeah.
What makes Emma so sure it's Susanna's work?
Well, a few things. First, the timing is spot on. Susanna was part of Mary's household when this would have been painted.
Yeah.
And historical records show they were pretty close.
Like BFFs.
Not quite, but Mary actually gifted Susanna 12 yards of black satin.
12 yards. That's a lot of satin. Like, that's a serious gift.
It definitely suggests a strong bond between them.
Okay, I'm convinced. What else?
The miniature also has these super specific details that link it to Mary.
Like what?
There's this cross in the portrait matches the description of a cross Henry VIII gave to Mary.
Ooh, a royal connection.
Exactly. And here's the clincher. Other potential artists like Lucas Horenbout and Hans Holbein weren't alive at this time.
So it narrows down the suspects.
Big time, making Susanna the most likely candidate.
Okay, so if Emma's right, this miniature could be huge for Susanna's recognition.
It would be a major addition to her known works, for sure.
And speaking of your work, do we know what other pieces might be attributed to Susanna?
That's the exciting part. The search is still on.
Huh.
There are probably other miniatures out there, maybe misattributed or tucked away in private collections, just waiting to be recognized as Susanna's work.
It's like a treasure hunt.
Totally.
Yeah.
And the whole Horenbout workshop thing adds another layer of complexity. Can we really separate those threads of collaboration to identify Susanna's individual contributions?
Well, that's a puzzle for sure.
It's a puzzle that keeps art historians like me busy.
And on that note,
Yeah,
I think it's time to move on to our other mystery woman,
let's do it.
Levina Teerlinc. She's almost like Susanna's counterpart, in a way, right?
Totally. Levina's story is fascinating. She was born about 7 to 10 years after Susanna, and just like Susanna, she came from a big deal artistic family.
Okay, I'm sensing a pattern here.
Her father, Simon Benning, was another famous Flemish illuminator. It seems like artistic talent was just in their blood.
Right, like a Renaissance version of a Hollywood dynasty.
Exactly. They were all connected, passing down skills and techniques through generations.
Okay, so Levina also ends up at the Tudor court, but how does that happen?
She gets there already married to a man named George Teerlinc. But here's the big difference between her and Susanna. We're just starting to uncover the full story of Susanna's work, but Levina, she had an official position at court.
Really? What was her title?
She was paintrix to the queen.
Paintrix. I love it. Sounds so official.
It really does, and it tells us she wasn't just a talented artist. She was a key figure in the royal household.
I'm guessing her salary reflected that importance.
Oh, absolutely. She got a hefty £40 a year.
Wow, that's a lot of money for the time.
And believe it or not, it was even more than Hans Holbein was paid.
More than Holbein. That's
Yeah.
wild. It really shows how highly she was regarded. But here's the thing. If she was so successful and well-respected, why don't we know more about her? Why isn't her name as famous as some of her male counterparts?
It is kind of a mystery, right? Despite her official role and undeniable success, not many of her works can be confidently attributed to her.
So some are probably lost to time.
Yeah, and others might be misidentified or maybe even hidden in plain sight, mistakenly attributed to other artists.
It's like a real-life Tudor art mystery. So what clues do we have about Levina's style? Are there any signs that scream Levina Teerlinc?
Alan Derbyshire, our miniature expert, says there are some things he looks for.
Okay, spill the secrets.
He describes her application of paint as kind of washy.
Washy. Is that like a bad thing?
Not necessarily. It could be a deliberate stylistic choice. He also mentions a bluish tone in the whites of the eyes and a lack of white highlights in the pupils.
Interesting. But like you said earlier, attributing artwork based on style can be super tricky. Could her style have changed over time, making it even harder to identify her work?
It's definitely possible. We have to remember she was working across several Tudor reigns, each with its own artistic trends and preferences. It's highly likely she adapted her style to suit the tastes of her royal patrons.
That makes sense. It's like another layer of complexity to the puzzle.
Yeah.
So even if we haven't found a definitive collection of Levina's work, what kind of impact do you think she had on the Tudor art world? What was her legacy?
Okay, get this. Levina was working at court during the early years of Queen Elizabeth I's reign.
Okay.
It's very possible she played a big role in shaping the Queen's image, even if we don't have concrete proof.
Interesting. Think about how iconic Elizabeth's portraits became.
Right. Her image was carefully crafted to project power and authority.
So you're saying Levina might have been a key part of creating that visual identity?
It's a fascinating thought.
That's a great point. It's amazing to think that this somewhat mysterious female artist might have had a hand in creating one of the most enduring images in British history. And speaking of Queen Elizabeth, what was her relationship with Levina like?
From what we can tell, it seems like there was a lot of respect and appreciation there. After Mary Tudor died, Elizabeth actually settled some outstanding debts owed to Levina.
Really?
And she even continued to pay an annuity to Levina's family after her death.
That's pretty significant. It suggests a real personal connection and a recognition of Levina's value beyond her artistic talents. So we have these two super talented women, Susanna Horenbout, whose artistry we're just beginning to rediscover, and Levina Teerlinc, the enigmatic paintrix to the Queen.
Yep.
What does their presence tell us about the role of women artists in Tudor England. Were they more common than we typically think?
It's a great question, and one that deserves more exploration.
Totally.
We have these glimpses into their lives and their work, but there's still so much we don't know. And this is where all the efforts to rebalance art history come in. We're finally starting to ask new questions, looking at historical documents with fresh eyes, and using modern technology to analyze these miniature masterpieces in ways we never could before.
It feels like we're just scratching the surface of these women's stories.
We really are. It's so exciting to think about how much more we might learn as research continues.
Okay, so before we move on to part 2, I have to ask, what are some of the new techniques being used to analyze these miniatures? Like, how are we uncovering more information about the artists who created them?
Oh, it's such an exciting time to be an art historian.
Tell me everything.
We're using things like AI to analyze brushstrokes in crazy detail, comparing works microscopically to identify patterns and similarities that we might have missed with the naked eye. And as more and more archives are digitized and made available, who knows what hidden documents or forgotten inventories might emerge that could shed new light on the lives and careers of these amazing women.
That's amazing. It makes you wonder how many more lost female artists are out there just waiting for their stories to be rediscovered.
It's a thrilling thought.
Yeah.
And it just shows how important it is to challenge those traditional narratives and really question our assumptions about who could or couldn't be an artist in different historical periods.
I love that.
I mean, think about it. If Susanna Horenbout was really as skilled as Albrecht Dürer thought she was, why did her brother Lucas get more recognition during their lifetimes?
Right.
Was it just because of societal expectations around gender, or were there other factors at play?
Such a good question.
And with Levina, did her official position at court, that title of paintrix, somehow overshadow her individual artistic legacy?
Ooh, yeah. It's almost like her official role became her identity.
Exactly. These are the kinds of questions that keep art historians like me up at night.
I can see why. It's like a historical detective story and a social commentary all rolled into one. It really makes you think about how history is written, who gets remembered, and whose stories are often left untold. So for our listeners who are just diving into this world for the first time, what's the key takeaway? Why should we care about these women who lived and worked centuries ago?
Because their stories remind us that talent and creativity can flourish in the most unexpected places, even within a rigid social hierarchy. They challenge us to think critically about how we construct historical narratives, how we assign value to art, and how we remember or forget the contributions of women throughout history.
It's a powerful reminder that history isn't just about names and dates.
Right. It's about real people, their passions, their struggles, and their incredible achievements.
And on that note, we're going to take a quick break and come back to dive even deeper into the fascinating world of Susanna Horenbout and Levina Teerlinc. Stay tuned. Okay, so we're back and ready to dive deeper into the lives of these amazing Tudor artists.
I'm ready when you are.
Let's pick up where we left off with Susanna Horenbout. So you mentioned those tantalizing questions about her work and her workshop.
Right. Like, can we really separate Susanna's individual contributions from the work produced in her family's workshop? It's a tough one.
It makes you wonder if some of her pieces are out there misattributed or hidden away.
Absolutely. Maybe tucked away in some private collection just waiting to be rediscovered.
That would be incredible. Like finding a lost masterpiece.
Imagine the headlines. Lost Susanna Horenbout miniature found in attic.
I'd be the first one at the museum.
Me too. Okay, but enough about Susanna for now. We have another fascinating artist to talk about.
Oh, yeah. Levina Teerlinc.
Oh,
Let's get into her story.
Levina is like Susanna's counterpart in so many ways, but her life took a slightly different path.
Fill me in.
Well, for starters, she was born about 7 to 10 years after Susanna. And just like Susanna, she also came from a super prestigious artistic family.
Okay, so we're seeing a trend here.
Mm.
Talented families dominating the art scene.
Right. It's like the Renaissance equivalent of a Hollywood dynasty. So Levina's father, Simon Benning, was another one of those famous Flemish illuminators.
Wow, these families were really interconnected, weren't they? Passing down skills and secrets through generations.
Totally. It's like they had this shared artistic language.
Okay, so how does Levina end up at the Tudor court? Did she get a royal invitation like Susanna's family?
Well, she actually arrived already married to a man named George Teerlinc. But here's the key difference between Susanna and Levina. While we're still piecing together Susanna's story, Levina, she held an official position at court.
Whoa, serious? What was her title?
She was paintrix to the queen.
Paintrix. That's amazing. It sounds so official and important.
It was a big deal. And it shows that she wasn't just a talented artist, she was a key figure in the royal household.
I bet her salary reflected that importance.
It did. She got a generous £40 a year, which was even more than Hans Holbein was paid.
More than Holbein. That's insane. It really shows how highly she was regarded. But here's the thing that always gets me. If Levina was so successful and well-respected, why isn't she more famous? Why don't we know more about her?
It's a fascinating question, isn't it? Despite her official role and her obvious success, fewer of her works can be confidently attributed to her.
So some could be lost.
Yeah, or maybe misidentified or even hidden in plain sight.
Like attributed to another artist by mistake?
Exactly, it's like a real-life Tudor art mystery.
Okay, so what clues do we have about Levina's artistic style? Are there any telltale signs that scream, Levina Teerlinc was here?
Well, Alan Derbyshire, our miniature expert, has pointed out some interesting characteristics.
I'm all ears.
He describes her application of paint as being kind of washy.
Washy? Does that mean it's like watered down or something?
Not necessarily. It could be a deliberate stylistic choice. He also mentions a bluish tone in the whites of the eyes and a lack of white highlights in the pupils.
That's pretty specific. But like we talked about earlier, attributing artwork based on style can be tricky.
It really can.
I mean, could Levina's style have evolved over time? Maybe she changed things up, making it even harder to identify her work?
That's definitely possible. Remember, she was working across several Tudor reigns, and each one had its own artistic trends and tastes. It's highly likely she adapted her style to suit the preferences of her royal patrons.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Like she was constantly evolving and innovating. So even if we haven't found a complete collection of Levina's work, what kind of impact do you think she had on the Tudor art world? What's her legacy?
Okay, so picture this. Levina was working at court during the early years of Queen Elizabeth I's reign.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
And it's very possible she played a significant role in shaping the Queen's image.
Wow, that's a big deal.
Right. Think about how iconic Elizabeth's portraits became. Her image was carefully constructed to project power and authority.
And you're saying Levina might have been a key part of creating that visual identity.
It's a fascinating possibility.
It really is. It's amazing to think that this somewhat mysterious female artist might have had a hand in crafting one of the most enduring images in British history. And speaking of Queen Elizabeth, what was her relationship like with Levina? Were they close?
It seems like there was a lot of respect and appreciation there. After Mary Tudor died, Elizabeth made sure to settle any outstanding debts owed to Levina.
That's pretty cool for her.
And she even continued to pay an annuity to Levina's family after her death. That's not just a standard financial transaction. It suggests a personal connection and a recognition of Levina's value beyond her artistic talents.
So we have these two incredible women, Susanna Horenbout, whose work we're just beginning to rediscover, and Levina Teerlinc, the Queen's paintrix.
Yep.
What does their presence tell us about women artists in Tudor England? Were they more common than we think?
It's a question that deserves more attention. We have these intriguing glimpses into their lives and their work, but there's still so much we don't know. And this is where all the efforts to rebalance art history are so important. We're finally starting to ask new questions, looking at historical documents with fresh eyes, and using modern technology to analyze these miniature masterpieces in ways we never could before.
It feels like we're just scratching the surface of their stories. It's exciting to think about how much more we might learn as research continues.
Oh, absolutely. There's so much more to uncover.
Okay, so before we wrap things up, what are some of the new techniques being used to analyze these miniatures? Like, how are we getting more information about the artists?
It's an incredible time to be an art historian. We're using things like AI to analyze brushstrokes in amazing detail. We can compare works microscopically to identify patterns and similarities that we might have missed with the naked eye. And as more and more archives are digitized and made available, who knows what hidden documents or forgotten inventories might emerge? There could be so much more information out there just waiting to be discovered.
That's incredible. It makes you wonder how many more lost female artists are out there just waiting for their stories to be told.
It's a thrilling thought, and it just highlights the importance of challenging those traditional narratives and really questioning our assumptions about who could or couldn't be an artist in different historical periods. We need to keep digging and keep asking questions.
I totally agree. So let's talk about Susanna Horenbout. If she was really as talented as Albrecht Dürer seemed to think, why did her brother Lucas get more recognition during their lifetimes?
Right. Was it just because of societal expectations around gender, or were there other factors at play? It's a complex issue for sure.
Definitely. And with Levina did her official position at court, that title of paintrix, somehow overshadow her individual artistic legacy?
It's an interesting question. It's almost like her official role became her defining characteristic.
Exactly.
Mm.
And it makes you think about how we remember artists and how their identities are shaped by the world around them.
It's like a historical detective story and a social commentary all rolled into one. We have to consider how history is written, who gets remembered, and whose stories are often left untold.
So for our listeners who are just discovering these artists for the first time, what's the key takeaway? Why should we care about these women who lived and worked centuries ago?
Because their stories remind us that talent and creativity can flourish in the most unexpected places, even within a rigid social hierarchy. They challenge us to think critically about how we understand history, how we value art, and how we remember or forget the contributions of women throughout time.
It's a powerful reminder that history isn't just about names and dates. It's about real people, their passions, their struggles, and their remarkable achievements.
Exactly. It's about bringing those hidden figures into the light and giving them the recognition they deserve.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive into the fascinating world of Susanna Horenbout and Levina Teerlinc. They were masters of their craft, navigating a male-dominated art world and leaving behind a legacy that continues to inspire and intrigue us centuries later. If you're as fascinated by their stories as we are, be sure to check out the show notes for links to further resources and information, and join us next time for another deep dive into the hidden corners of history, where we'll uncover more untold stories and challenge conventional wisdom. Until then, keep exploring and keep asking questions.
Yeah, and you know what's really cool? We're finding all these amazing connections between these women artists.
Like what?
Well, think about it. Both Susanna Horenbout and Levina Teerlinc were Flemish, and they both came from these super talented artistic families.
It's like their destiny was to become artists.
Totally. And they both ended up working at the Tudor court.
Which is like the epicenter of power and culture in England at the time.
Exactly. It's like this incredible convergence of talent and opportunity. And it makes you wonder, were there other women artists working at the Tudor court that we just haven't discovered yet?
That's a great question. It's like we're only seeing a tiny fraction of the whole picture.
Right. It's like those historical documents and records are just waiting to be re-examined with fresh eyes. Who knows what other amazing stories are out there just waiting to be told?
It's exciting to think about. Imagine all the lost female artists whose names and works are just waiting to be rediscovered.
It's like a whole hidden layer of art history.
It's like we're rewriting history as we go.
And that's what makes it so fascinating. We're challenging those traditional narratives and expanding our understanding of the past. We're finally giving these women artists the recognition they deserve.
Absolutely. So to wrap things up for our listeners, why should we care about these women who lived and worked centuries ago? Why are their stories important?
Because their stories remind us that talent and creativity can exist anywhere, even within a rigid social hierarchy like the Tudor court. These women were trailblazers. They defied expectations and left their mark on history. And their stories challenge us to think differently about the past and to question the narratives that have been passed down to us.
It's about recognizing the contributions of women throughout history and giving them their rightful place in the story.
Exactly. It's about acknowledging the diversity of talent and perspectives that have shaped our world.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time to bring our deep dive into the world of Susanna Horenbout and Levina Teerlinc to a close. These two remarkable women were masters of miniature portraiture, navigating a male-dominated art world and leaving behind a legacy that continues to inspire and intrigue us centuries later.
It's been an absolute pleasure exploring their stories with you.
Likewise. If you're as fascinated by these artists as we are, be sure to check out the show notes for links to further resources and information. And be sure to subscribe to The Deep Dive for more fascinating explorations into the hidden corners of history. Until next time, keep exploring and keep asking questions.